Eating and living a plant-rich life can be so simple, but somehow many folks enjoy making it seem so hard. Don't you agree? At a fundamental level, food is what brings us all together. And the notion of breaking bread, really means let's get to know one another and chat. Well, tonight's guest is someone I'm honored to break bread with, and is also someone who helps dispel so many myths about a plant-based lifestyle, including, that it's hard, that it doesn't bring families together, the kids like vegetables. We're gonna have to talk about that one later. Anyway, good evening, everyone. I'm Jim Spellos, and welcome to another edition of Changemakers, where we get to spend some quality time with people in our community making a huge difference in lives, their own, their families, and many, many others. And tonight, my guest is someone who exemplifies really living a plant-rich life. Rebecca Johnson, Chef Rebecca Johnson, is a former national model turned plant-based health supportive chef. After years of struggling with a stubborn health condition, multiple surgeries, and a pre-cancer diagnosis, she researched her options and chose to change her diet to live plant-based. And after 3 months, 6 years worth of symptoms that were already now gone, and she averted a fourth surgery. Rebecca's results were so striking that she left a marketing career at WebMD to become certified in plant-based nutrition through the amazing T. Colin Campbell Nutrition Studies course at eCornell. 20 plus years later, after the diagnosis, Rebecca now dedicates herself to offering wellness solutions to help women, children, and families learn about nutrient-dense eating in order to avoid the health risks of the low-nutrient standard American diet. Rebecca, good evening. So great to have you.
Hello, Jim. Great to see you.
Yeah, so let's just dive right into your journey because it sounds like it was an amazing one. Can you just share some more about the journey and how you healed yourself with the plant-based diet and lifestyle?
Sure. Well, the journey started very young, young woman, and I had a lot of just typical, we call symptoms every month. And it just ended up being such a big problem for me that it affected my daily life. And so I ended up having to have surgery, but then it came back again. And that happened two more times, Jim. So three surgeries, and I was about to have my fourth. And so I'd done all this research. There is this organization called Hallelujah Acres where I actually got my first plant based certification. And they had all these testimonies, people who were talking about getting off of meds, their lives changing, their health changing by eating plant based. And because I had suffered for 6 years, I said, well, let me just go in and try this. And so I went plant based, but it was raw, live food. And immediately, because of which I didn't know any of this then, I just tried it because someone recommended it and I was tired of suffering. So when I started eating that way, everything just started to change. All the symptoms, the pain. I lost 35 pounds. I wasn't trying to lose weight, I was just trying to stay alive because my doctor said that I was making a fatal decision by not having surgery. I didn't want to have surgery anymore because I was laying in the bed for 4 to 6 weeks. Family had to come and take care of me. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't do anything. So that did not seem like the best next step. So when I tried food and everything changed, I realized, okay, there's some real power in this.
Surgeons told you have to have surgery. I mean, he was telling there was no other way around it.
Well, when we look at the medical profession, and, listen, if I had to have surgery tomorrow, yes, I want anesthesiology and I want a good surgeon, right? Thank God that's not the case. But they don't really learn about nutrition. And
Yeah.
so that's something that's starting to change, as we know, with ACLM, PCRM, all these, other organizations led by, wonderful Dr. Barnard and others, who was actually in that course that I took many years ago. And there was a video called The Self Healing Body. And so it was there that I learned that the body actually can heal itself, but they don't know. And that's the problem. So when I went to him, his only choice was surgery.
Yeah. It's amazing. I had an appointment with my cardiologist today, and finally, after 6 years, got off the last of my blood pressure medications.
Wow.
But what happens is that that when I was in the hospital, they just prescribed one, then this wasn't working. They put another one. All of a sudden, I'm on 5 different medications, and nobody tells me there's issues, there are side effects to it, and you have to figure that out for yourself. So it really would be great to see ACLM and these organizations flourish more and give doctors education from medical school on up to be able to understand, food is medicine more than drugs is medicine.
Absolutely. Lifestyle medicine. And that's
Lifestyle.
what we're talking about, right? We're talking about eating and living in a certain way that supports a healthy lifestyle without necessarily having to do those things. And even in your case, that's such great news, because I'm sure that your whole goal was to get to this day, right? Where you didn't have to take the medication.
It's a very happy day around here. Let's put it that way. I'd gotten up the statin a few months ago, and and it's all because of how we eat. It's all because of the lifestyle. It's all because of that. So, which books, which websites were your go-to resources early on? Which were the ones that all of a sudden made you go, "I see it now. I understand it."
Yeah, Jim, that was 22 years ago. So I can't remember where I was going then, but I will say that the thing that stuck out to me the most was hearing from other people who had made the change and were seeing results. And what I loved about it is they were actually giving the details of the milligrams they were on, what medication they were on, how long they'd been taking it. And so as I read that, I said, oh, well, this is possible. And that's all I needed. All I needed was that spark that said, it is possible to do this. And then that's when I took the next step. But nowadays, of course, we follow, PCRM and all these others, right? And a lot of plant-based chefs, some of which we've, worked with, like Nina Curtis, for instance, who really are focused on not the entertainment of food, but we like food to be fun and delicious, tasty. We want it to look good, but do we need to risk our health in order to have that?
No.
And that's the kind of culture that I feel we need to get out of as Americans, because unfortunately, and I don't really want to get on my soapbox here, we know that food in this nation is a commodity.
Yeah.
So it's really all about selling and profit. And I especially see that when you look at kids and the food that is promoted for kids to eat. Even the menu at a restaurant. What is it? It's fries, it's chicken, fried chicken fingers. Just recently we taught at out in Brooklyn, and I was talking to the kids about Eat the Rainbow. And so one of the girls said, "Oh, did you get that from Skittles?" And she walked me right into something I always like to talk about, which is when you see a Skittles commercial, everybody's on the rainbow. They're looking so happy and energized. But when you understand what it's made from, which is chemicals, and I talk to the kids about that, yet this is our country. But yet when you go to other countries, they're not even allowed to use red dye and other things. So we've got
are the kids getting it though when you're saying that? I mean, this is something that's been marketed to them so heavily. What's their reaction to you when you tell them?
Their reaction is usually, "Oh, it tastes good." That's their usual reaction. So then I always come back with, "Yeah, but have you ever tasted a fresh mango that has that same color, that's been picked off a tree, that is from nature, that no one has done anything to, right? And it's not going to harm your brain or your body." So it is a conversation, but it's unfortunate because everything is just marketed towards them at a very young age in order to keep them as a customer for, the length of their life. So, here we are trying to educate children and families. But we see it. I particularly always think about the whole gluten-free movement. So when you go in to buy potato chips now, it says gluten free. They were always gluten free, right? But it's become this conversation piece. Oh, I'm eating gluten free. I'm eating gluten free. So we see that the public can move the economy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because now all these companies want this gluten free label put on their, the word put on their label, but it's because the public is pushing that. So
But
we can
yeah,
do that with eating plant based as well.
but the public believes that that's the healthy way to eat. They've sort of been fooled into thinking, well, gluten's bad for me, so I can't have it, and therefore I'm doing good for my health. And that's the sort of
That
misinformation.
no question that is true, but we have to, as those that are doing this work, that we have to educate them around the fact that what really is going on there, right?
Mm.
But also that there's this other part of it. In the US we eat a lot of bread. The number one food is a sandwich, and the number two is a pizza. And when you look at, pizza, how it was made into a vegetable, right, by Congress, because it has tomatoes on it. How much tomato is on that? So, where we need to go is that the meal must be plant centric, right? Yes, you can have bread, you can have these other things, grain, but it should be mostly plants.
Yeah, well, people are learning that slowly, really slowly. Now, I want to get into your past a little bit because I understand your dad was a professional cook, and I'm going to also guess your love of cooking came from him. Can you tell us about him?
Well, sure. My dad grew up. We grew up in Philadelphia, but then he was sent to a farm when he was very young. And my great grandfather was a farmer, and so he was on the farm with fresh food. And of course, it wasn't plant based. I mean, they had, I tell people all the time, I ate everything from the rooter to the duder, everything on the pig. I ate it as a child, but there was this love and this passion. Why? Because of family. For the African American culture, when you look at our history, a lot of times the only time we were sitting down and relaxing and really enjoying one another's company was around a table. So there's all this love, there's all this nurture around food. And so when I cooked with my dad, and I tell parents all the time, get your kids in the kitchen. They don't have to have a knife which could harm them. Let them push a button. Let them take a spoon and swirl it around. Absolutely, this is something that makes such a difference.
Okay, so in that context of being with family and having it to be family centric, why is it so difficult today for people to break bread with their own family and to cook on their own? What's preventing that from happening? Is it
Okay,
is it time?
I just kicked my cord out. I'm sorry, I got to put it in. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. Although otherwise, I'm going to lose you.
I see. It's live YouTube. You never know what happens around here.
Okay, so go back to that question.
So the question was, it seems to be difficult for a lot of families to actually spend that time together. What's the disconnect from knowing how healthy it is for families to take the time and eat dinner together to where we are right now?
It's the same thing. During the plant purification, during the 70s, it all became about convenience.
Mm-hmm.
So food was in a box. You heated it up in the oven. It wasn't about sitting together and cooking. When you look at indigenous cultures, it's not just the eating of the food and the sitting down, it's the preparation. Because the preparation together is a bonding experience. That is how all this started for me. Little did I know this was not my first plan,
Mm-hmm.
right, to be doing this work. But when it came time, what I connected with was that nurture and that connection that I got through cooking together. So absolutely, we just live in a culture that just doesn't value that much anymore.
But we're doing kids a disservice by not teaching them this in the classroom, at home. How do we get to that point where all of a sudden they want to be? I figured the Food Network would do that they would make the next level of chefs because they're seeing it as star-based. But
Yeah, well, they're making the next level of celebrities chefs,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That's what that's all about. But remember home economics, and
I,
I talk to people about it all the time. They're like, "Oh yeah," and their eyes light up. I remember when
yep.
I was in school and we learned how to do things like sew a button on, saw a piece of wood, make a plant, make a dish, whether it's plants or not. But we live in a culture now that is just not valued, and it doesn't. When you look at the fact that food is a commodity, that is not anywhere in the chain as well. Let's teach people how to cook
Mhm.
because it's of greater value. And I say, particularly living in New York City, because I'm from Philadelphia. So when I'm in Philly, people invite you over to eat. In New York, you go out to eat.
Well, there's so
That's
many restaurants and such small apartments. I mean, it's a perfect pairing right there. So what are some myths? I know you've dealt with myths a lot in your time. There's a lot of misinformation. So I know one of the ones that you had mentioned is that kids don't like vegetables. Is that true? Now, I'm a kid who hated vegetables. That's another story entirely. So myth, fact, how do you get kids to eat the things that supposedly they don't like?
Well, example, kids will say, "Oh, I hate broccoli. I hate broccoli." And then I'll say, "Well, what's the broccoli like when you're eating it?" "Oh, it's so mushy and it's kind of gray." And I'm like, "Gray broccoli? Broccoli's supposed to be green." "Well, it's the way it's being cooked. It's being boiled."
Hmm.
But you take broccoli and you roast it, and it doesn't take much, right? In the
Yeah.
oven, season a little bit, roast it off. They love it. I was telling somebody the other day about how I used to go to a school when I first started this work 20 some years ago. It was uh I learned how to make no 20 some years ago is when this whole health crisis came. But then about 10 years later, I was in a school and I made cauliflower broccoli. And you use turmeric and you add garlic powder and things to it and you roast it off, and I called it cauliflower popcorn, and kids were actually asking for more popcorn,
Oh,
right?
brilliant.
So it's really just the way it's prepared, but it's also the plate. When you give a child a plate and the vegetables need to look good, they need to taste good, and it needs to be most of it. You don't force children to eat. That's a whole thing that psychologists teach about not forcing children to eat, because then that could be some sort of problem going forward. But it really has a lot to do with how we elevate vegetables in the meal and
Mhm.
how we prepare them.
Well, vegetables aren't the center of the plate in most people's households. They're sort of on a corner, two stalks of broccoli, and that's about it. You know,
I always laugh because when I see parsley on my plate, that's one of the first things I go to and I eat it, right? And people are like, "Why are you eating that?" It's a leaf. It's a vegetable. Actually, parsley has some of the most iron than
yep,
even many other leafy vegetables. So
it is incredible. I'm going to get to ask you about some chef hacks in a second, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to have you talk a little about your efforts in women's self care through plant based eating and lifestyle. So, what are you doing in that area?
yeah. So I'm really trying to promote because women are the ones that make the decision in the home, usually for the food. They're the ones that are shopping and cooking. It still is that way. Funny enough, my mom cooked when I was growing up, but my mom cooked because I had to eat. It wasn't that same like passion that my
Mhm.
dad had. So what I find is that happens a lot with women is they have to feed their families, but there isn't this understanding about beyond just feeding them the quality, the density of the ingredients, and the nutritional aspect. And there are, when you look at the numbers of Black women, we're usually the ones that we die sooner from breast cancer, where our stats in terms of blood pressure is higher than others. We're always coming up um, in these numbers as being higher where these
Mhm.
lifestyle problems are. So we really haven't been reached yet, because if we had, there would be change there. And there's so much stress on women in a lot of areas. And so making what we hear this word self-care a lot now. And it's really been over the past couple of years in the pandemic and mindfulness, but it's putting yourself first. And I think that women tend to do the opposite. They tend to put others first and then themselves. But the point is, you can't give from an empty well. And how is it going to help your family if you're not well?
True. It's not going to help at all. You have to always think about yourself first, and it's not a selfish thing to do, but it's love for other people
It's
by
like
making
putting the oxygen mask on first, right? Before
exactly.
you help others. And that's what
Exactly.
I would say about eating this way is
Mhm.
if you do that, you'll have the energy, you'll have the health that you need to be able to live long and strong, which is, that's why I'm plant strong, right? And particularly women who are a little older,
Yeah.
right? Because what happens is when we get to a certain age, all these things start happening to us. We don't realize that these conditions happen over time, right? It's not like an instant problem. And they're finding fatty streaks in children at the age of 6 now. So this is something that happens over a long period of time. When we get sick, it's just that the body at that point is just had enough.
Yeah. So growing up, you ate soul food, but it has such a bad reputation. Why? It's about vegetables and local stuff. How did that all of a sudden occur? That soul food becomes this fried and everything unhealthy for you cuisine.
It's just what you put in it. I can take yams and I don't have to put lots of butter and sugar in order to make delicious yams.
Well,
Right? It's taking collard greens, like I told my mom when I became a vegetarian at the age of 15. You got to get those ham hocks.
it's
You got
sacrilege not putting the ham hock in there, right?
Yeah, in the collard green, right? So the food, there's nothing wrong with the food itself.
Mhm.
It's just preparing it differently. And of course, food is passion. It's this thing where like you get used to a certain flavor and you want it to feel good going down. But there are ways to do that without risking your health. So I think that that's, one of the main things. I've had people say to me, "Oh, you're going to make mac and cheese? Is it going to taste like the mac and cheese I'm used to?" No, it's not. It's not cheese. So it's not going to taste like that. But it can taste good and it can be delicious and you can learn to train your palate because we know that, listen, when you start eating this way and you eat cake, it's like, oh my gosh, the
Yeah.
icing, I cannot take icing because of the level of sugar in it. But that happens over time because the palate absolutely can be changed.
It does. So you're a chef. The audience always wants to hear about shortcuts, hacks. What do you do to really make food even more seasoned and flavorful without giving into the sugar and the oil and the salt?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You got to get those things out
Mhm.
and you got to find ways. And there are plenty of ways.
Such
And
as,
one of my ways is instead of a lot of salt, you're using herbs.
mhm.
And so, could be so many different herbs. We don't really look at herbs in a lot of our food because we're so used to putting the salt for the flavor.
Mhm.
The salt is adding sodium, but it's not really adding a complex flavor. So if you take something like thyme and you take parsley or rosemary and you're layering
Mhm.
these flavors, you get a denser flavor profile. If you use things like smoked paprika, which is great for anyone that's chasing a kind of umami flavor, or namashoyu, which is, an organic, not as processed, soy sauce, let's
Mhm.
say, but it's, just so much better for you.
Sort of
Um,
less processed than tamari, even.
yes, because those things are, yeah, they're definitely more processed. I won't get into the process
Yeah.
of it, but garlic powder, onion powder, fresh garlic, roasted garlic,
Yeah.
just taking a bulb of garlic and roasting it in the oven. Of course, you have to close it up somehow. And then what happens is it browns a little bit, but it caramelizes.
Yep.
So the caramelization adds a little sweetness to it. So when you put it in your food, you get more of this flavor. And so it's just learning those little hacks that make a difference in how your food tastes, because that's what people are chasing. They're chasing flavor.
Flavor. What's funny about the roasted garlic is I was always told, now make sure you put some olive oil in there on top of the garlic. And when we first started cooking this way, and we go, what do you need the olive oil for? There's no flavor there that it really enhances anything. It's incredible. We're almost out of time, believe it or not. So what I want to do is ask you a few real quick 1 or 2 word answers. And one of them is you're doing a demo for the Plant-a-thon that's coming up in a couple of weeks. Is it top secret what you're making, or is it something you want to share?
I'm making a stew.
A
So it's
stew.
like a beef stew,
Mhm.
but instead of beef, it's beans.
Yeah.
So it'll have a lot of vegetables. I'm not going to tell you my big secret about why you want to make a certain kind of food. I'll share that then. But it is a stew, a real hearty winter stew.
Yum. So, what's your favorite dish to prepare?
Oh my gosh. Well, one of them I love is a raw lasagna. And that's when you take the zucchini and you
Zucchini.
cut it the long way. But
Mhm.
it is a labor of love. You make your own marinara, you make your own pesto. It has to be done over a couple of days. And
Understood.
then you let it marinate overnight.
So, leftovers, repurpose, heat them up, or eat them cold.
Oh, well, depends on what kind of leftovers they are, but I usually reheat my leftovers, and
Mhm.
sometimes I'll take them and make them into something else.
I
So
see you do
I'll
the
mix
repurpose
them
thing.
in. Sure,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Beautiful. Least favorite vegetable? Is there such a thing?
One of the ones that I have trouble with is eggplant
Really?
because of the consistency. Eggplant for me has to be cooked at a fairly high heat so that the outside can be a little crispy and roasted. Otherwise, that texture,
Do
tough.
you do you have the bitterness issue that some people have with eggplant? We love it. We don't find it bitter, but some people go, "Oh, it's
Well,
horribly bitter."
Jim, that's one of my favorite flavors is bitter.
Absolutely. So any
I love
chance?
bitter foods. I
Uh,
love all the bitter foods.
Absolutely. So any chance we see a Chef Rebecca cookbook at any point in the near future?
Oh, I like that idea.
I do too.
I've actually done a couple little things for some schools.
Hmm.
I did a little cookbook for kids that was actually sponsored by Whole Foods, but nothing for adults, but something to think about.
So last question here. Is there a question out there about cooking healthfully that you've never been asked that you think needs to be addressed and needs to be communicated to people?
That I've never been, I'm sure there is, but
Mhm.
something that I think needs to be communicated to people about cooking is to not get stuck in being so perfect. I had a friend that would say to me, "When you cook, it tastes good. When I cook, I follow these recipes, and let me tell you, she had the best recipe books. I have several of them because she gave them to me. Thick ones, $40, $50 for a recipe book. I don't ever follow the recipe. I always change it in some way because I know what flavors I like. Just like I said, smoked paprika. I will put that in a lot of things because I'm trying to get that smoky flavor. But I never make it that way. So it really has to do with playing in the kitchen, making a little laboratory. First thing people think is, oh my gosh, I'm going to waste my money. It's okay, right? It's like just you don't have to make the largest dish. And of course, for me, I'm single, so I'm making food for one. I'm making maybe food for a couple days. But you could still get in the kitchen and play around. Just say, I'm going to take a potato this week and I'm going to make it differently. and I'm going to add the flavors that I like to it and see what happens. Because some of those things will be mistakes and they will be the best thing that you've ever made.
There's no right or wrong in the kitchen, right?
I don't think so. Well, if you're a baker, maybe.
Well, yeah, we won't go into that. I had Chef Carol on last time, and there's a different story altogether. So I just want to show people where to reach you, plantrichlife.com. And I see you've been active on Instagram, again, at Plant Rich Life. Rebecca, it has been such a pleasure having this half hour with you today. So thank you so much for being here. And in fact, I want to thank everybody for being here and watching again next month on Change Makers. We will chat with registered dietitian Lillian Correa about the amazing work she's doing as a dietitian for the plant-based lifestyle medicine program at NYC Health and Hospitals at Bellevue. On behalf of everyone here at Plant Powered Metro New York, I'm Jim Spellos, wishing you optimal health, a wonderful whole food plant-based Thanksgiving. I didn't even ask Rebecca what she's making for Thanksgiving. That was a mistake on my part. And we will see you next month right here on Change Makers. Thanks a lot, everybody.